Dear sir or madam, I just read your book. It's a piece of crap, wasn't worth a look. It was really stupid and a waste of time, and you just can't write, so you shouldn't be a shitty ass writer. Shitty ass writer.
You know what? It just occurred to me, no matter what I might have said before, Paolini doesn't actually plagiarise Tolkien. He plagiarises George Lucas and Anne McCaffrey and Ursula Le Guin and everyone else I've accused him of plagiarising, but he doesn't plagiarise Tolkien. You see, plagiarism is when you steal someone else's idea and try to pass it off as your own. With Tolkien, Paolini doesn't do that. He goes beyond that. He doesn't just pretend that he came up with ideas Tolkien came up with, he pretends that he himself is Tolkien.
I'm not just talking about concepts here, I'm talking about the writing itself. Everything from the made-up languages and general long-windedness to the thesaurus rapes and oldie-worldy syntax is all part of a desperate bid to prove he's Tolkien's spiritual successor. He's not a thief, he's an impersonator, like the kind you get for Elvis or Michael Jackson or Frank Sinatra, the kind who stags onto the stage half drunk wearing something their mum made. And nowhere is this more apparent than at the start of this chapter, where Eragon asks about the sea, and Bronn replies, "The sea is emotion incarnate. It loves, hates and weeps. It defies all attempts to capture it with words and rejects all shackles." And in case your wrists are still intact after hearing that, we're promptly treated to an elvish poem. "O liquid temptress 'neath the azure sky, your gilded expanse calls me, for I would sail ever on, were it not for the elven maid who calls me. She binds my heart with a lily-white tie, never to be broken, save by the sea, ever to be torn twixt the trees and the waves."
Earth to Mr. Paolini! Tolkien studied linguistics his entire life and was Merton Professor of English Language and Literature at Oxford. He could pull it off. You can't.
When they get to Teeham, after several more pages worth of filler, Natch, they meet a witch called Angela, whom the author supposedly based on his actual sister, hence why she has such an anachronistic name. She provides some bizarre comic relief, minus the comic relief, in which he's trying to prove that toads are the same as frogs, meaning there's no such thing as toads since they're actually frogs.
Yeah, that's just plain stupid.
Then they go find Brom's old friend Jode to see if he can help. Jode explains that they won't be able to look at the shipping records since only the corrupt Imperial officers are allowed access to them. It's also heavily implied over the course of this chapter that there's more to Brom and Jode than meets the eye, and that they're hiding something about their past relationship from Eragon. No, it's not that they're gay, although considering there's a useless, irrelevant and hardly touched upon subplot that goes nowhere about how emotionally distant Jode and his wife are from one another, it's still not entirely out of the question. Next morning, Eragon pays a visit to the annoying witch from earlier. At her shop, we're introduced to her familiar, a thing called a werecat, which, while not quite as annoying as its mistress, serves absolutely no purpose whatsoever. Oh, and its name? Solemnbum. Yes, Solemnbum. Honest to God, that's its real name. I am not making this up. Oh well, at least it's funnier than the crap about frogs and toads. Angela tells Eragon's fortune, since no epic fantasy novel, trademark, is complete without a vague prophecy. Of course, given who we're dealing with, said prophecy serves only to further reinforce the hero's Mary Sue status, since everything we learn from it was already pathetically predictable to anyone who's even slightly familiar with the sort of tropes associated with generic fantasy novels, trademark, namely that Eragon will lose someone close to him, fall in love with a beautiful woman of noble birth, live an incredibly long life, and be betrayed by a close family member.
How fascinating. I'm practically on the edge of my seat.
Later, he talks to Brom, who has been investigating, and it turns out the only way to access his shipping records is to sneak into the castle in which they're kept and steal them. However, before they do, Eragon will have to be taught how to read, or else he won't be able to understand the records. While this might seem like a nice bit of realism, it's really not. For while it makes sense for a medieval farm boy to be illiterate, it doesn't make sense for him to become literate in a week. Seriously, he learns how to read and write in a fucking week! Eventually, Eragon, Brom and Jode infiltrate the castle as planned and make their way to the records room, where the werecat, Solemnbum, makes another brief appearance which is just as useless as before. They steal some records which they examine once they've escaped and gone back to Jode's house, and trace magic oil to a city called Drasleona. Next morning, Eragon and Brom say goodbye to Jode and leave Tiam to head off to Drasleona, where they hope they'll be able to find the Razat. On their journey, Eragon interrogates Brom about the secrets it's obvious he's keeping from him, until he gives in and spills the beans. Apparently, he and Jode used to be terrorists, freedom fighters, who worked with the Varden to bring down the Emperor, King. Together they arrange to steal the last 3 remaining dragon eggs, with which Galbatorix hoped to start a new generation of dragon riders under his command. But in the end they only managed to get their hands on one, Saphira's. They were tracked down by Morzan, Galbatorix's second in command, who tried to reclaim the egg, and got into a fight with Brom, who won and killed him, after which he went to hide in Carvahal. Now that the egg is hatched, Galbatorix wants to find and subdue Eragon and Saphira so they won't be a threat. What bugs me most about all this is not the ever-rampant Star Wars plagiarism, on which I needn't elaborate further, but that it makes no sense for Brom not to tell Eragon until now. I mean, why did it have to remain a secret? It's not some world-shattering revelation that Eragon would have been traumatised by, like, say, if he was actually a robot, or his father was the villain. Oddly enough, only the latter turns out to be true, and even that eventually gets retconned. Perhaps Paolini does have a few surprises up his sleeve after all.
Also, what I really don't get is why the Emperor, King, wants to kill or capture Eragon and Saphira that much. Why, in the name of Chuck Norris, doesn't he bloody well do it himself?
Bear in mind that this is the guy who, almost single-handedly, rendered an entire race of magical supermen, plus their dragons, entirely extinct in the space of just a few years, while barely more than just a kid. And yet he can't be bothered to get his ass off his throne to stop one inexperienced young boy and his fledgling dragon?
Belgium, I say! Belgium!
Later, while camping, they're attacked by a group of Urgles, whom Eragon tries to take on, but he uses too much magic and overexerts himself, causing him to faint. When he wakes up, Brom has a go at him for being so reckless and almost getting himself killed. Now, I'm not going to lie, this is actually a really good scene, at least compared to the rest of the book, since it's one of the few occasions on which Eragon actually seems like a real person. He's made a mistake, and now he has to come to terms with it and face the consequences. It's times like these when I realise that, for all his flaws, Paolini does in fact have plenty of potential, and with a lot of experience and a bit less ego, he could really have been something.
That's it for me this week. I'll be back again next week, and this time I actually mean next week, and not say next month. Until then, thanks for watching, and goodbye!